when Hannah and I first met, one of the things that really unified us, and something we've done since the beginning of our relationship, has been music together. It started off with us writing music in our dorm rooms, and it eventually turned into us traveling around the country and playing music in different venues. And I know that kind of sounds glamorous to some people, traveling around the U.S., playing a different show every night, new people, but in our case, it was far from glamorous. We spent multiple nights sleeping in Walmart parking lots in between shows. We became experts at finding the perfectly flat space in someone's living room to lay down an air mattress where you could get a good night's sleep. And no joke, one tour, it was 2 weeks long, we ate pizza for every single meal. It's less than glamorous. But if you looked at our social media pictures during that time frame, you might think otherwise. I want to show you a picture from 2016. Josh, you can pull it up on the screen there. This is our 32-foot RV, and this was taken during our West Coast tour. So we were driving out west, and we had just played a show somewhere in the middle of nowhere in Montana, and it was late at night. We decided we needed a place to stop and sleep, and it was so in the middle of nowhere that there wasn't even a Walmart nearby. So we parked in a national forest because those are generally free. So it's pitch black out. We wind up this dirt road, and we find a spot that's good enough, and we park there, kind of maneuver into place for the night, and get a good night's sleep. When we woke up, we realized that we hadn't just driven up a dirt road in the middle of nowhere in Montana in a national forest. When we woke up, we realized that we had driven up a dirt road in the middle of nowhere in Montana in a national forest and parked just a few feet from a 50-foot cliff. This picture is taken after we kind of maneuvered it away from the cliff, but it was terrifying to say the least. And on top of that, this was a one-lane road, and it was a one-way road. And so in order to get off this mountain, we had to do about a 30-point K-turn on this pathway with the edge of the back of the RV hanging over the cliff. It was terrifying. But if you just looked at this picture and you didn't know the backstory, you might just think it's a picturesque picture. It's the quintessential traveler, out in the middle of Montana with those gorgeous mountains in the background, some pine trees on the side. But the truth behind the story was much more sobering. We were just feet away from disaster. And I share that with you today because I wonder how many of us here in person or watching online, you can relate to this to some degree in your own life. Not that you've parked on the edge of a cliff somewhere, but maybe some people here, we have this tendency to paint this perfect picture of our lives. By all accounts, our lives look like they're going great. They're picturesque by many people's standards. But the truth behind our lives and the story behind our lives can be much more sobering. I mean, we see this on social media, don't we? You see everybody's highlight reel, their best moments captured, the best food they've eaten, the best vacations they've been on, the best friends they have. Rarely do you find someone on social media that is posting the worst parts of their lives, at least consistently. Not even just on social media, but I find in my own life, I have this tendency, I can be having the worst day ever, and someone will come up to me and say, "Hey, Justin, how are you doing today?" And my house could be burning down in the background, and I feel like I would still say, "Oh, I'm doing great. How about you?" We have this tendency to paint this picture-perfect view of our lives. By all accounts, it looks like we have a good relationship or a good marriage. Our kids are succeeding. Life is so good that your dog takes itself out to use the bathroom. You're so #blessed. You've got a new car. You've got that new phone. But for many, the truth behind the story of our lives is that we're just barely hanging on. That we're feet away from disaster. And in our lives, they feel like we've parked on the precipice of grief. You lost that loved one, and at times when you go to that place or that holiday comes around, it's almost unbearable. For others, it's those anxiety attacks that come in the middle of the night and the heavy breathing that you just can't catch your breath and you wonder, am I going to be able to make it through the night? For others, your relationship with a family member is just hanging on by a thread. And as picturesque as many of our lives look, if we were truly honest with ourselves, not everybody here has everything together. It seems we've bought into this lie, or we've made the church with a capital C, as Dwayne once poetically said it. We've made the church a museum for saints instead of a hospital for the sick. But do you really believe that God only loves you at your best? Or is it possible that maybe God also loves you at your worst? There's a story in the book of Mark about a man who was and his son who were literally hanging on by a thread. We're in the book of Mark, and we've been studying this. And I just got to give a shout out to Emily for preaching last week. Didn't she do an amazing job? Thank you, Emily. It was awesome. We really appreciate it. I got a lot out of the message. After where Emily kind of took us, we find Jesus coming down from a mountain, and this man and his son, they're barely hanging on by a thread at this point. See, the son was born with an evil spirit, and it caused him to have fits of epilepsy, and it actually got so bad at points that this demon inside of him would throw him into the fire. Like, he would come out with burns on his arms, and it was so bad that at times he would be thrown into water and almost drown. And his dad undoubtedly has tried everything. I mean, they've seen doctors, they've seen teachers of religious law, they've even seen the disciples of Jesus, who are just off of a winning streak as far as exorcising demons, and they can't seem to remove this one. He's barely hanging on. And this is where our passage picks up and where Jesus shows up. We're in Mark chapter 9, verse 14. So as when they returned to the other disciples, they saw a large crowd surrounding them, and some teachers of religious law were arguing with them. When the crowd saw Jesus, they were overwhelmed with awe, and they ran to greet him. "What is all this arguing about?" Jesus asked. One of the men in the crowd spoke up and said, "Teacher, I brought my son so that you could heal him. He's possessed by an evil spirit that won't let him talk. And whenever this spirit seizes him, it throws him violently to the ground. Then he foams at the mouth and grinds his teeth and becomes rigid. So I asked your disciples to cast out the evil spirit, but they couldn't do it." Now, we don't know initially how this played out, what the disciples, what steps they took to exorcise this demon from this boy, but I find it really interesting that Jesus comes in and they're arguing with the religious leaders. Like, at some point, this boy who is so desperate for help, who's so desperate for healing, has become more of a theological problem to them than a person in desperate need. And this is where Jesus comes in. He says, "You faithless people, how long must I be with you? How long must I put up with you? Bring the boy to me." And so they brought the boy. But then the evil spirit saw Jesus. It threw the child into a violent convulsion, and he fell to the ground, writhing and foaming at the mouth. "How long has this been happening?" Jesus asked the boy's father, and he replied, and I imagine he did with tears in his eyes, "Since he was a little boy. The spirit often throws him into the fire or into the water, trying to kill him. Have mercy on us and help us if you can." I want to just pause there, because that phrase, "have mercy on us and help us if you can," it's really telling. Another translation says it like this: "But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us." This man had been so disappointed, so let down for so many years. He was barely hanging on to hope that he doesn't even ask Jesus for full healing. He just says, "If you can do anything for me, if you can relieve any of these symptoms, if you can help him in any way, please do it." And Jesus responds, "What do you mean, if I can?" Jesus asked, "Anything is possible if a person believes it." And this is the moment where the man lays all of his cards on the table. The father instantly cried out, "I do believe, but help me overcome my unbelief." When Jesus saw that the crowd of onlookers was growing, he rebuked the evil spirit. "Listen, you spirit that makes this boy unable to hear and speak," he said, "I command you to come out of this child and never enter him again." Then the spirit screamed and threw the boy into another violent convulsion and left him. And the boy appeared to be dead. A murmur ran through the crowd as people said, he's dead. But Jesus took him by the hand and helped him to his feet, and he stood up. You know, when I put myself in this man's shoes, his answer to Jesus, I do believe, but help me overcome my unbelief. That admission of unbelief, that admission of a full lack of faith in Jesus, I can't honestly say that would have been my response. If I put myself in Jesus or in this man's shoes, I can see myself saying, yeah, Jesus, of course I believe. I mean, I pray every day. I read the Bible. I'm a pastor. Of course I have enough faith. I won't want my weakness or unbelief to be shown for fear that Jesus would be disappointed in me. While I haven't been in the Father's shoes before, in this particular instance, I do know what it's like to pray for weeks and months and even years and not necessarily have the answer to prayer that I've been looking for. I can remember when Henry was first born. Henry was a terrible sleeper. I mean, I'm talking like 2 hours at a time was a good night, and then he'd be up for another 2 hours like screaming, 2 hours again. I mean, it was like 3-4 hours of sleep a night was a good night. We were living off coffee even more than we are right now, which if you know us, that's saying a lot. Henry was a terrible sleeper, and I remember it only got worse with age. So when he got to be strong enough where he could pull himself up on the crib, he would start chewing on his wooden crib. And we'd come in and he'd have paint chips all over his face. And then there'd be times where I'd walk in and there would be like splinters missing from the crib, but I couldn't find the splinters. So your guess is as good as mine where they were ending up. So we couldn't just let him cry it out. And I remember, you know, when Henry was first born, I would pray, God, would you help him sleep through the night? Would you just help him to sleep until 6 or 7 in the morning? And then as months went by and the sleeping didn't improve, my prayers changed. And I started saying, God, would you just help him sleep for 1 more hour? Or just 2 more hours? And then by the time he was 1.5 years, it was, God, would you just help him? Would you help me sleep through the crying? And I remember during that time, you know, we were surrounded by family and friends, and people would ask me, Justin, how is it being a father? What's it like being a parent? And, of course, I told them the highlights, you know, the funny things Henry did, the goofy things he said, how he ate paint chips and splinters, and how we were worried one day we'd walk in and we'd have to take him to the hospital because Beaver Boy ingested too many paint chips. Of course, I told them the highlights. But I didn't share the weaknesses or the vulnerabilities that I had. I didn't share that I could barely get through the day because I was so exhausted. And I think looking back on that, I bought into this lie that vulnerability and weakness is something to be hidden from your family and friends and even God, as if they only want me at my best. But we look at the story, and that's an outright lie, isn't it? I mean, look at this man. It's not what he's done that saves him. It's not his spiritual resume, all the Bible verses he's memorized, all the sermons he's preached. No, it's his vulnerability and admission of weakness that brings healing. It's his recognition of his utter dependence and need of Jesus. This boy experiences healing not because his dad has everything together, but because he's willing to admit that he doesn't. I wonder how many of us struggle with that in our daily lives. You know, I was driving around and I saw a local construction company, and on the back of their car they had a slogan, and it said, "We are what we build." And I thought that's the perfect phrase to capture where many of us find ourselves today in society. We are what we build. That's a great slogan when you build really good things. And I'm guessing that was the case for this company. Otherwise, why would they use that phrase? But many of us, we use that same logic. I am what I build. I am my achievements. I am my successes. I get my value and worth from what I do, from my kids' successes, from that job promotion, from that money that I bring in. But the truth is that if we are what we build, everybody here can willingly admit we've built great things in our lives, but each of us is guilty of building something that's not so great. We've built that web of lies that has hurt those around us deeply. We've built that secret addiction that nobody knows about, that moral failing. You see, if we are what we build, if we're just a sum of the choices that we've made, then the best we can all hope for is to break even. Because each and every one of us, for as much good as we do, we fall short of the glory of God. Which makes the gospel truly good news. Because while the world says you are what you've done, the gospel says you are what he did for you. You're not trying to earn God's love, rack up enough points to get into heaven. It's been freely given to you. Scripture says while you were still a sinner, that's when Christ died for you. Not when you had everything together, not when your life was going great, but in your weakness while you were still a sinner. And that kind of love, that brings true freedom to us that no other love can offer us. It's a freedom from trying to earn our way into heaven. A freedom from trying to hide our weaknesses in front of God as if he won't accept us for who we are. It's a freedom from our past sins and regrets, and it's a freedom to live into who God is calling us to be. And I wonder how many of us, we've oriented our lives around this idea that God and the people around us only want us at our best, when that couldn't be further from the truth. This man, I can't speak to the father in the story if he was someone who took great pride in his accomplishments or his abilities, but he has this moment of clarity with Jesus, and one commentator says it like this: the father in the story is our example of someone who understands that God wants all of us, not just the holiness of the Pharisees, or the bold confidence of the Syrophoenician woman, or the adoration of Mary of Bethany. He also wants the limitations of Peter, the terrible miscalculations of Paul, and whatever else we have to give, good or bad. Let me say it like this: Jesus won't heal who you pretend to be. Jesus doesn't love who you pretend to be. Jesus meets you in your brokenness while you were still a sinner and offers you eternal life. I love 2 Corinthians chapter 12. It says this. It says, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect, not in your strength." It says, in your weakness. God's power is made perfect in our weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest on me. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong. It may just be that at our weakest moments, God's strength can save us. It can work in spite of our weaknesses. See, the world has it backward. The world says it's your strength that saves you. It's your achievements. It's the things that you do that can save you. The gospel says it's his strength that saves you. But the truth is, you'll never be able to enter into that healing, into that promise of God, until you get completely dependent on Jesus. Dependency is our vessel to delivery. Dependency is our vessel to delivery. I'll illustrate it like this. When Hannah and I moved to Rochester this summer, we had stairs at our previous house, but they were it was one of those split levels, so there weren't a lot of stairs for our kids to possibly fall down. And in our new house, we have a full flight of stairs. And June, our youngest, was just kind of getting her bearings. She was a pretty good walker, enough that you could trust her to go up and down the stairs most of the time. And I was supposed to be watching June during this time. I'll admit, this is my fault. And Hannah was upstairs, and I kind of turned away just for a second. And in that time, June started making her way up the stairs, and I heard that noise that no parent wants to hear. You know, the thud of falling down a stair. or 5. She was okay. She landed, and of course she was crying. You know, I picked her up. I felt so bad. I'm consoling her, and finally she came around. No bruises, no scratches. I mean, this is a tough girl. Like, she gets beat up by her brother a lot, so she could sustain this one. But when I had her stand, she couldn't put any weight on her right leg. You know, I'd put her down, and she'd pull it up and kind of wince. And we're thinking worst case scenario, so we took her to the hospital, and luckily it wasn't a break, it was a sprain. And they told us, you know, this is good news, because a child at this age, they'll bounce back in about a week or two. But they said, if you want complete healing, she needs to be 100% dependent on you. She can't be trying to pick herself up, walk on those feet, and make it from point A to point B. She has to be 100% completely dependent on you, meaning you have to carry her everywhere she needs to go. If she needs to go in one room, you take her there. If she needs to go up the stairs, you take her there. If she needs to go down the stairs, you take her there. Utter and complete dependence. And I wonder how many of us, we try to pick ourselves up. We try to push through the pain and the weakness and the grief and the anxiety and the depression, when God is saying, if you would just rest in me, if just like a child you lift your arms and let me pick you up, become completely dependent on me, it's there that you could experience true healing. See, what I'm trying to get us to see today is that when you walk into this church building, or you log onto the live stream, or you pray to God, you don't have to act like you have everything together. You don't have to come in acting like your life is picturesque and show us all the highlight reels. If you came today carrying brokenness and weakness, if you feel weary and worn out and tired and exhausted, if you feel anxious or depressed or embarrassed or lonely, that may be the very weak place where God's power can truly work through you. See, when we are truly dependent on God, when we truly rest in Him, God can do the impossible. He can mend broken relationships. He can heal old wounds. Prodigals can come home. The helpless can find hope. Prison doors, chains of addiction can come crumbling down. Miracles can take place. And even the skeptical and the cynical, they can find faith in some of the darkest places. When we truly allow ourselves to be utterly dependent on God, He can do immeasurably more than we ask or imagine. So how do we cultivate dependency? How do we really take that posture of dependency? I think step one is we have to admit that we're weak. We have to admit that we don't have everything together. We can't come in pretending that everything is great and our lives are good, and when we pray to God, only pray about the highlights, but bring our weakness to Him. And so I want to put that into practice today for us as the team comes forward. As we go into this next song, wherever you're at, whether you're sitting or... I just want to encourage you to take a posture of dependency and talk to God about those areas of weakness. It might be sitting in your chair. It might be coming forward to pray. I love to lift my hands when I worship, and that's not a, hey, everybody, look how spiritual I am type thing, but that's what my daughter does when she needs me to pick her up. Whatever's most comfortable for you, I want to encourage you and challenge you to bring your weakness to God. Second, I want to challenge you to bring your weakness to some close friends. The scripture that I used today, boasting in my weakness. It seems inappropriate if I don't boast in some of my weakness today. If I preach a sermon on being weak and don't share some of my weakness. I've struggled with anxiety for most of my life. And it hasn't been until the past few years that I've really come to terms with that anxiety. It's an anxiety that I thought I could push away by achieving, working more, by ignoring it, and it's something that has caught up to me over time. I remember my first anxiety attack, not knowing what was happening. The heavy breathing, the trembling hands, the worry, the fear that seemed so irrational at the time, but I couldn't shake it. And I thought, this is something that I've got to figure out. I can't bring it to Hannah. I can't bring it to the family. I need to figure this out because it's happening internally. I brought it to Hannah one day, and to be honest, I was embarrassed. I was a little humiliated. And here's what Hannah didn't do. She didn't tell me, hey, you got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You got to figure this thing out. All right? No, she loved me. She encouraged me. She challenged me. Some of us were so afraid to bring our weakness to other people for fear that we'll be judged. But what I'm telling you is that we need to be a church where weakness is a place where we can come together. We can be in a small group community, and we can be encouraged, and we can be challenged, where we can be supported in our weakness, because it's there that God's strength will truly show. God's strength in spite of the anxiety, in spite of the grief, in spite of those things that we hold on to. And so what I want to challenge you with today is I want to challenge you, if you're not in a small group yet, you need to be in a small group. You need to be in a community of people outside of Sunday where you can interact with, where you can encourage one another, where you can bring your weakness to them and you can share your vulnerabilities. And if you're watching online right now and you're thinking, man, I don't feel comfortable coming out yet, or I'm not quite there yet, we have good news. We have an online small group available. So if you're watching online right now, I want to encourage you, sign up for that online small group today. You need people that can surround you, that can encourage you. You know, one of the hardest things about COVID has been the sheer isolation that many of us have experienced. You cannot fight this fight on your own. You need people around you to support you and to encourage you. If you want to sign up online, I want to encourage you, send us an email at hannah@cityhoperochester.com or go to our website, cityhoperochester.com. We'd love to get you plugged into a small group. As we go into a time of worship, I want to encourage you on two things again. Be willing to admit the areas that you're weak. And number two, don't try to fight this on your own. Come see us afterwards if you need to be in a small group. We want to be a church transformed by the love of Jesus. We want to be a church that supports one another, that encourages one another along in this journey, and a church where you can walk through the doors and not have everything together and still experience the love and the transforming power of Jesus.